"Your ideas aren't fresh anymore, Eleanor. You need to retire," they said. They fired me from the place I gave 30 years of my life. The firm my name was synonymous with, even if it wasn't on the letterhead. Stratton and Cole. The firm I had helped build into an architectural titan. I just looked at Julian Thorne, at his perfect, wrinkle-free 40-year-old face, at the HR woman sitting beside him who wouldn't meet my eyes, and I just said, "Okay." But they didn't know what I meant by okay. They thought it was defeat. They thought it was the weary, quiet acceptance of a 52-year-old woman being put out to pasture. They mistook my stillness for surrender. They saw a relic, a monument to a bygone era, and they couldn't wait to tear it down. When I hit 51% 6 months later, my phone rang. I was sitting in the back room of a dusty, wonderful old bookshop, a stack of signed, notarized proxy agreements in my lap. The air smelled of paper and potential. I looked at the caller ID on my phone. It was Julian Thorne, the CEO I was about to fire. Have you ever been in a room and suddenly realized you're the only one who doesn't understand the joke? That's what it felt like to sit in that glass-walled conference room at Stratton & Cole 6 months prior. To understand that phone call, you have to understand the day they threw me away. It was a Tuesday, a crisp, bright Chicago morning. I was supposed to be presenting the final schematics for the new Chicago Museum of Art. It was my magnum opus, my design, a sweeping structure of glass and reclaimed steel that I'd designed to breathe with the lake as I'd pitched it. It was a culmination of my life's work, a building that was both powerful and gentle. I had worked on it for 3 years. I walked into the 40th floor boardroom, my presentation case in hand, and it wasn't the museum board. It was just Julian and a woman I didn't know from human resources, a termination specialist, I'd later learn. "Eleanor," Julian started, steepling his fingers. He always did that when he was about to deliver bad news he personally enjoyed. It was his thoughtful CEO pose. "We're moving in a new, more dynamic direction. The board feels, and I concur, that your vision, it's just not fresh anymore." The word hung in the air. Fresh. 30 years. I had joined Stratton & Cole right out of graduate school. Michael Stratton himself, the founder, had been my mentor. He was a gruff, brilliant man who wore cardigan sweaters and smoked a pipe. He called me his legacy. He said I had good bones in my designs. I was the one who built this firm's international reputation after old Stratton retired. He had trusted me. I had won us 3 Pritzker-equivalent awards. My face was on the cover of Architectural Digest. Granted, that was 5 years ago. But legacy is built on stone, not on 15-minute news cycles. Julian, however, was a finance guy. He'd been brought in 3 years ago to trim the fat. He saw architecture not as an art class, but as an asset class. He wore suits that cost more than my car and spoke in a language of synergy and optimization. He saw me as the biggest, fattest line item in the budget. "The museum project," Julian continued, gesturing dismissively to my presentation case, "is being handed over to Theo." Theo, the 28-year-old wunderkind he'd hired from a firm in Denmark, a young man who believed architecture was a generative AI prompt. He's going to add a more algorithmic approach to the facade, Julian said, pleased with himself. Bring it into the 21st century. My blood ran cold. Generative AI? Julian, that's a gimmick. The structural integrity is designed for steel and glass, not a 3D printed plastic web. The load-bearing calculations are Eleanor, he cut me off, his voice soft, which was always worse. You're 52. You've had a phenomenal run, a truly historic run. But it's time to retire. The firm is prepared to offer you a generous severance package, provided you sign the standard non-disclosure and non-compete. They were firing me. They were firing me, and they were giving my life's work to a kid who thought legacy was a type of software. I looked at him. I saw the dismissal in his eyes. I wasn't a partner. I was an obstacle. I wasn't a legend. I was a relic. He was smiling. That's what I'll never forget. He was enjoying it. Okay, I said. The HR woman, who had been studying her cuticles, finally looked up and slid a thick leather-bound folder across the table. If you'll just sign here. I stood up. I didn't look at the folder. I'll have my lawyer review it, I said. My voice was even. I would not give him the satisfaction of a single tremor. And I walked out. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't plead. I didn't cry. I walked through the massive open-plan office. It had once been a bustling studio of drafting tables and hand-built models. Now it was rows and rows of silent young people staring at dual monitors. They looked up as I passed, their faces a mixture of pity, ambition, and a little fear. I was a ghost, and they were all afraid of ghosts. I went to my office, the corner office with the view of the lake and the skyline I had helped shape. I packed a single cardboard box, my photos with Michael Stratton, my first T-square, a worn wooden one, the heavy bronze Pritzker medallion. When I got to the elevator, my old assistant, Maria, was there. She was in her late 40s, a brilliant engineer who had been demoted to administrative lead by Julian. I knew, looking at her terrified, pale face, that she knew she was next. Mrs. Reed, Eleanor, I'm so sorry, she stammered, wringing her hands. It's okay, Maria, I said, forcing a small smile. It's just architecture. But it wasn't. Was it? It was my life. The ride down the elevator was the longest ride of my life. When I stepped out into the lobby, the security guard, a man I'd said good morning to for 20 years, looked away. I was already invisible. The first month was a blur of humiliation and suffocating silence. My apartment, a place I had designed to be a serene escape from the pressures of the job, suddenly felt like a tomb. I was 52. My non-compete, I soon learned, meant I couldn't practice architecture in the state of Illinois for 2 years. They hadn't just fired me, they had erased me. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever looked in the mirror after a profound loss, a job, a relationship, a life, and not recognized the person looking back? It's a hollowing, terrifying feeling. You feel irrelevant, obsolete, and the world seems to agree. The sadness was a physical weight. I woke up, drank coffee, and stared at the skyline, feeling like a ghost. I had given my entire adult life to Stratton and Cole. I had sacrificed relationships. I had never married, never had children. The firm was my baby, and it had just told me I was a bad mother. Then the legal papers arrived, the official offer, the generous buyout for my partnership's stake. I opened the envelope, I read the numbers, and the sadness. It didn't just disappear. It crystallized. It turned from a cold, heavy fog into a single, sharp icicle of pure, unadulterated rage. It wasn't a buyout. It was an insult. They were valuing my 30 years of partnership, my 5% stake in the firm I had built at almost nothing. They had cited a performance clause buried deep in the 300-page partnership agreement, claiming my failure to innovate and resistance to new modalities had actively diminished my value to the firm. They weren't just firing me. They were stealing from me. They were using my own dedication as a weapon against me. They knew I wouldn't fight. They expected me to go away, to be a graceful old woman. That was the moment the old Eleanor, the sad, obsolete architect, died. And the new one, the one who understood strategy, was born. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "You want to talk about value, Julian? Let's talk about value." I didn't hire a litigator. I hired a forensic accountant, a man named Arthur, who Julian had also retired a year earlier. Arthur was the former CFO, a man who knew Stratton and Cole's books better than Julian ever would. He was now running a failing bookshop, and he was bitter. "He's leveraging the firm to the hilt," Arthur told me, peering over his glasses in the dusty back room of his shop. "He's taking on massive debt to fund these Moda condo projects. He's promising the investors a 40% return in 2 years, which is impossible, unless he's cutting corners," I finished. "Cutting corners, using substandard materials, violating codes, you name it," Arthur grunted. "The man is a cancer in a bespoke suit." "I need more than a hunch, Arthur. I need proof." While Arthur started digging into the financials from the outside, I went to the city archives. I was an architect. I knew how to read the blueprints of a structure, and a company is no different. I pulled the original 1920 charter of Stratton and Cole. I knew it existed. Michael Stratton used to quote from it like scripture. "A building isn't a machine, Eleanor," he'd say, tamping his pipe. "It's an organism. It has to live." I sat in the dusty, quiet basement of the archive, reading the 100-year-old document. It was bound in blue leather, the type crisp. It was full of the old man's hopeful, almost poetic language. But it was also an ironclad legal document, and in the dim light I found it. Article 4, Section 2, the Stratton Charter of Excellence. It was a moral and environmental clause. It stipulated that the firm, in perpetuity, must dedicate itself to architecture that serves the community, prioritizes sustainable practice, and respects the environment in which it is built. I stared at that line for an hour. Julian's new projects, the ones he was using to fund his new direction, they weren't museums, they were moda condos, quick-build, low-cost, high-profit residential towers he was stamping all over the suburbs. For the next 2 weeks, I wasn't an architect, I was a private investigator. I put on a hard hat and safety vest. I visited the moda condo construction sites. I posed as a journalist for a small trade blog. I talked to disgruntled contractors. I pulled materials reports from the public city filings, cross-referencing their supplier codes with Arthur's data. And I found it. It was worse than I thought. Julian wasn't just building cheap. He was building dirty. The materials were sourced from suppliers with massive environmental violations. The insulation was cheap, non-green rated, and, in 2 cases, flammable. The carbon footprint of each building was catastrophic. He wasn't just violating the spirit of the Stratton Charter, he was taking a bulldozer to it. He was hiding it all in a complex web of shell companies and falsified supplier reports, the same reports he was showing his investors. This was it. This was the leverage. Because the charter had a penalty. It was a time bomb ticking away in the firm's foundation. Article 4, Section 3, the heir's prerogative. It stated that if the Charter of Excellence was ever found to be, quote, grossly and willfully violated, the entire 30% block of shares held in trust by the Stratton family, which were traditionally non-voting silent shares, would be immediately activated. They would become Class A, fully voting, controlling interest shares. Julian, in his arrogant quest for fresh ideas, had ignored the 100-year-old foundation he was standing on. He had dismissed it as a relic, just like he'd dismissed me. I now had to find the heir. A few days of deep-diving ancestry and trust records gave me a name, Clara Stratton, Michael's granddaughter, 42 years old. She wasn't an architect. She wasn't a Chicago socialite. She was an environmental activist and hardcore conservationist, living in a yurt on a protected reserve in rural Oregon. She apparently hated the family legacy and used her trust fund dividends to buy up land, to prevent development. She was, in every way, Julian Thorne's worst nightmare. I booked a flight to Portland. The culture clash was immediate. I, in my tailored black suit, wool coat, and leather boots, stepped out of a mud-splattered rental SUV into a world of towering pine trees and damp, fresh earth. It was raining. Of course it was raining. She met me on the porch of a small, rustic cabin that served as her office. She had dirt under her fingernails, her hair in a practical braid, and she looked at me with open, undisguised suspicion. "I don't talk to developers," she said, her voice flat. She was blocking the door. "I'm not a developer," I said, holding out my hand. "My name is Eleanor Reed. I was your grandfather's protégé." Her eyes sharpened at that. She didn't take my hand. "I know who you are," she said. "You're one of them. You're the one who built that glass box in Dubai." "I am," I said, not flinching. "A building that won 3 awards for water reclamation and cooling efficiency. A building your grandfather and I designed the concept for together before he passed." That gave her pause. "I'm here, Ms. Stratton, because a man named Julian Thorne is using your family's name to poison the planet, and I have the proof." I unzipped my briefcase and pulled out a thick, bound report, not just the materials violations, but a side-by-side comparison. On one side, her grandfather's original, hand-drawn, elegant designs. On the other, the toxic cookie-cutter blueprints for the moda condos. He fired me because my ideas weren't fresh, I said, my voice low and steady. He's destroying your grandfather's legacy. He's committing fraud, and he's building environmental disasters. And you are the only one who can stop him. Clara stared at me, her eyes as sharp and gray as the Oregon sky. She looked at the report, then back at me. "I'm listening," she said, and finally, she stepped aside. We sat in her cabin for 6 hours. The rain hammered against the tin roof, a relentless drumbeat to our conversation. I laid it all out. The falsified supplier reports, the environmental impact assessments he'd buried, the toxic insulation, the shell companies Arthur had uncovered, and the staggering amount of debt Julian was using to finance it all. Clara Stratton was not her grandfather. He was a romantic who built monuments to human ambition. She was a pragmatist who fought to preserve the earth. She was, as I'd suspected, disgusted. "He's a parasite," she said, her voice a low growl. She was pacing the small room, which was filled with maps of watershed systems. I said, "He's also committing fraud. He's showing one set of books to his investors and another to the suppliers. He's leveraging the firm's assets, your assets, to fund it all." "So what do you get out of this, Eleanor?" she asked, stopping to fix me with that sharp, gray-eyed stare. "Revenge? You want to burn him down. I just want him to stop poisoning the river." "I want my firm back," I said, my voice as steady as the steel beams I used to design. "I want to stop him, yes. I want to save the Stratton legacy, yes. But I also want to gut his entire fresh idea from the inside out. I want to fire him. I want to take my museum back. And to do that, I need to take control." "And you think activating my 30% will do that?" "It's the first step," I said. "With my 5%, we'll have 35%. That's a powerful voting bloc. It's not control, but it's enough to call for an emergency vote, to initiate a full independent audit, and to freeze his projects. It's enough to start the war." She stared at the rain for a long time. "My grandfather, he loved that firm. He used to send me letters, trying to get me to visit. He'd include sketches of buildings on the napkins. I always thought he was a fool, a dreamer destroying the planet. I never answered the last 4 letters." Her voice was quiet, filled with a regret I understood all too well, the regret of things left unsaid. "Julian Thorne thinks your grandfather was a fool too," I whispered. "He thinks he's a relic, just like he thinks I am." Clara's jaw tightened. "All right, I'll activate the shares. But I'm not coming to Chicago. I'm not sitting in a boardroom. I'm fighting a timber company that's trying to clear-cut a state forest. That's my war." "You don't have to," I said, sliding another document across the table. "This is a proxy agreement. You activate the shares, and you sign over your 30% voting rights to me. I will be your voice. I will be your grandfather's voice." She looked at me, a long, calculating stare. She was deciding if I was just another Julian, another developer in a bespoke suit. "You'll stop the Moda condo projects? All of them? I will personally dismantle them, board by board, and I will use the salvaged, non-toxic materials to build the community gardens your grandfather's charter also mandated." She smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. "Okay, Eleanor Reed, let's go burn him down." When I flew back to Chicago, I wasn't a relic. I was a weapon. I was armed with 35% of the company. I went straight to Arthur's bookstore. The bell above the door jingled, and he looked up from his ledger. "Well?" he grunted. I placed the signed, notarized proxy on his desk. His eyes widened. He let out a low whistle. 30%. The man is a dead man walking. "He's not dead yet," I said, pulling up a stool. 35% is a loud noise, but it's not a kill shot. Julian is the CEO. He controls the board, which is stacked with his finance buddies. They'll vote with him. He'll tie us up in litigation for years, claiming Clara is incompetent or that I'm just a disgruntled employee. By the time we win, the firm will be bankrupt. We can't just wound him. We have to take him all at once. We need 51%, Arthur said, his mind already working. A hostile takeover. Exactly. So, where do we get another 16%? Arthur turned to his old, beige computer terminal. He was the only man I knew who still ran a DOS-based accounting system. Julian bought out a lot of the smaller partners, the ones from your generation. He diluted their shares, offered them pennies on the dollar. Most took it, but he typed, the green cursor flashing. But not all of them. The really old partners, the ones who retired in the 90s, before the tech boom, their partnership stakes were different. They were based on the old charter. They're small, 2%, 3%, but they're solid. He couldn't force them out. He just ignored them. He sends them a tiny dividend check every year and assumes they're too old to care. He assumes they're relics, I said, the theme of my new life. Exactly, Arthur grinned. He thinks they're irrelevant. Let's make a list. For the next 2 months, I was on a mission. I wasn't just an architect. I was a political campaigner, building a coalition of the forgotten. My targets were not corporations. They were retirees in Florida, widows in Arizona, and forgotten partners in the Chicago suburbs. My first visit was to David Hesh in Sarasota, Florida. David had been Michael Stratton's very first partner, a brilliant structural engineer. He was 85 and living in a sprawling, sun-bleached retirement community. I found him on a golf course. He was thin, tanned, and had a look of profound irritation on his face. "Eleanor Reed, I remember you. Good bones. You're the one who let that finance brat take over." My stomach tightened. I didn't let him, David. He pushed me out. The same way he's pushing Michael's legacy out. Puffed. Legacy, he scoffed, lining up a putt. Legacy is for dead people. I'm here to break 90. What do you want? Money. I want your proxy, I said. You own 4% of Stratton and Cole. And I get a check for $12,000 every year for it. It pays for my membership. Why would I mess with that? Because Julian Thorne is running the company into the ground, I said, my voice sharp. He's building flammable, toxic apartment blocks and slapping the Stratton name on them. That's his problem, not mine. He missed the putt and swore. I was failing. He was right. He was 85. Why should he care? I had to find a different lever. Do you remember the Cligman Tower? I asked. He stopped, his hand halfway to pick up the ball. What about it? David turned to look at me, his eyes no longer clouded. That finance brat, I said, is faking the reports. He's using the cheap insulation. He's building a tower of kindling, David, 1,000 homes, and he's putting your name on it. Michael Stratton's name. My name. He was silent for a full minute. That damn fool, he whispered. He's not just a brat. He's a criminal. Yes, he is. And he's using your 4% to do it. He pulled a scorecard from his back pocket and a pen. I'm not signing a proxy. It's too complicated. But I'll sell you my stake. All 4%. For $1. And you, Eleanor, you go get that son of a bitch. I walked away with 4% of the company. I was at 39%. The next few weeks were a blur. I flew to Scottsdale to meet Sarah Cole, the 90-year-old widow of the other founder, Mr. Cole. She was frail, living in a beautiful home and sharp as a tack. She hated Julian. He stopped sending the Christmas baskets, she told me, sipping her tea. Michael Stratton sent a basket every year. Even after Robert died, Michael sent me a basket. This new man, Mr. Thorne, he stopped them. Not cost-effective, his assistant told me. She smiled, a brittle, paper-thin smile. I have 3%. Take them. And please, dear, do be a terror. I was at 42%. I went back to Chicago. I met with two smaller, forgotten partners, both in their 70s, who were horrified by the Moda condo designs. They'd been complaining for a year, but Julian's office just ignored their letters. They gave me their proxies, totaling 5%. I was at 47%. I met with Maria, my old assistant. She had been fired, just as I'd predicted, a month after me. She was working 2 jobs and was furious. It's not just that he's a monster, Eleanor. He's an idiot. He doesn't understand architecture. He thinks it's a spreadsheet. Maria, I need your help. I'm building a coalition. I'm taking the company back. I'll do whatever you need, she said. I'll testify. I'll protest. I'm just an assistant. I don't have any power. That's where you're wrong, Arthur said, joining us. He'd been digging deeper. Maria, your uncle was a man named Stefan Petrov. He was a draftsman, one of the first 5 employees Michael Stratton ever hired back in 1952. Yes, my great-uncle, Maria said, confused. He left me my retirement, what little there was. He also left you this, Arthur said, sliding a copy of an old stock certificate across the table. A founder's bonus. Michael Stratton gave 1% of the firm's total stock to each of his first 5 employees. It was non-voting unless the Charter of Excellence was breached. My heart hammered against my ribs. Maria, I said, trying to keep my voice even, you own 1% of Stratton and Cole. Her jaw dropped. What? I'm a partner? You're a weapon, I said, and I need your 1%. She signed the proxy without a second's hesitation. I was at 48%. We were so close, so close. For a month, we were stuck. We hunted, we dug, we went through every file. Arthur and I spent our nights in the back of that bookstore, fueled by stale coffee and pure adrenaline, searching for the last 3%. It's not here, Eleanor, Arthur said, rubbing his eyes. It was 3 a.m. We've got everyone. The rest of the shares are held by Julian's board and by large-scale institutional investors who only care about the quarterly returns he's faked. They'll never side with us. We were stuck. Have you ever been so close to your goal you can taste it, only to be stopped by one final, impossible wall? That's where we were. 48%. It was a rebellion, but it wasn't a revolution. It wasn't enough. The charter, I whispered, staring at the wall. Read the charter again, Arthur. Read the whole damned thing. He grumbled, pulling the scanned copy up on his screen. I've read it. Section 2, environmental. Section 3, heirs prerogative. Section 4, Founder's Bonus. Wait. What? Wait, he said, leaning in. Article V, Section 1, the Arbiter Clause. My God, I'd forgotten. What is it? It's a poison pill, a dead man's switch. Michael must have put it in after a fight with Cole. It states that in the event of a tie or a crisis of leadership that threatens the charter, a single, final, tie-breaking vote is granted to who, Arthur? To the longest-serving employee of the firm, not defined by partnership, but by continuous service. A single golden share. 2%. We stared at each other. The longest-serving employee, I breathed. David Hesh is retired. Sarah Cole was never an employee. It has to be. Arthur was already typing. He fired all the old guard. Me, you, the engineering heads, except one. He couldn't fire him. He's not a partner. He's not high level. He's just always been there. Who? Thomas, the head archivist, the man who still manages the physical blueprints in the sub-basement. He's 68. He's been working there for 45 years. He started in the mailroom. He's the one. Thomas, a quiet, gentle man who wore bow ties and was pathologically shy. He was the firm's living memory. Julian had probably never even spoken to him. I didn't call. I didn't wait. It was 4 a.m. I drove to Thomas's small bungalow in Oak Park. I must have looked like a madwoman. I knocked. He came to the door in a flannel robe, his white hair sticking up. "Mrs. Reed," he said, blinking, terrified. Is the building on fire?" "Yes, Thomas," I said, my voice shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. "It is. May I come in?" I sat at his kitchen table. I told him everything. He listened, his hands wrapped around a mug, his face growing paler and paler. "He wants to digitize the archives," Thomas whispered when I was done. He told me my physical media was obsolete. He was going to shred Mr. Stratton's original hand-drawn sketches. He said they were a fire hazard. "He's a fire hazard, Thomas. He's destroying everything. Your 45 years of work, Michael's entire life. He's violating the charter. And Article 5 says you, and you alone, have the 2% tie-breaking vote." Thomas looked at me. He wasn't the shy, quiet archivist anymore. His eyes were burning. "Mr. Stratton," he said, "was the kindest man I ever knew. He paid for my mother's hospital bills out of his own pocket. He gave me a job when no one else would." He went to his study. He came back with a small, framed certificate. It was his original 1970s employment contract, signed by Michael Stratton, and attached to it, a single embossed share, the Arbiter share. "Tell me what to sign," he said. I was at 50%. I was still 1% short. I had miscalculated. Thomas was 2%, David was 4%, Sarah was 3%, the small partners were 5%. Maria was 1%, that was 15%, plus my 5%, 20%, and Clara's 30%, 50%. It was a tie. I couldn't win. I slumped, the adrenaline draining, leaving me hollow. It's a tie. 50-50. It's not enough. What about me? We both turned. Maria, my assistant, was standing in the doorway. She had followed me. "Maria?" she said, her face pale but resolute. "I've been on the phone all night. I've been talking to the others, the administrative leads, the ones Julian fired, the ones he cut the pensions for, the secretaries, the model builders, the IT guys. He bought them all out of their small employee stock options. All but one." "Who?" "Me," she said. "I didn't just have my uncle's 1%. I had my own, a 1% option that vested 5 years ago. I never cashed it in. I kept it because, I don't know. I kept it because it was the only piece of this I still owned. I have 1%. My uncle had 1%. That's 2%. I did the math, my heart stopping. 30% Clara, 5% me, 4% David, 3% Sarah, 5% small partners, 2% Maria, uncle plus herself, 2% Thomas, the archivist. Total, 51%. It was done. We all stood in Thomas's kitchen, the sun just starting to tint the Chicago sky with a pale, hopeful gray. The phone on the table buzzed again, an angry, insistent vibration. Arthur, Maria, Thomas, the ex-CFO, the ex-assistant, the archivist, the obsolete, the irrelevant, the retired, and me, the relic. Together, we were 51% of Stratton and Cole. I picked up the phone. The buzzing stopped. I looked at the three of them. Their faces were a cocktail of terror and pure, undiluted adrenaline. This was the moment. Have you ever stood on the edge of a diving board knowing that once you jump, nothing will ever be the same? That's where we were. We were about to find out if there was water in the pool. I pressed the speakerphone button. "Hello, Julian." My voice was calm. It was the calmest thing in the room. "Eleanor, my God, what have you done? My CFO just got an alert, an emergency board meeting, an audit. Who the hell do you think you are? You're a former employee. You're nothing." "That's where you're wrong, Julian," I said, looking at Arthur, who was already dialing our lawyers. "I'm a 5% partner, and I'm calling this meeting on behalf of the new controlling majority of this firm." There was a choking sound on the other end. What majority? What are you talking about? I control the board." "You control your friends, Julian. You don't control the shares. It turns out the people you dismissed, the people you ignored, they still had a voice. I'm talking about David Hesh. I'm talking about Sarah Cole. I'm talking about Thomas Gable and Maria Petroff. I'm talking about Clara Stratton." I heard a sharp intake of breath. He knew that last name. Clara Stratton activated the heir's prerogative. Your motor condo projects, the ones you've been building with flammable, non-compliant materials, you didn't just break the law, Julian. You broke the charter, and that activated her 30%. You bitch. You can't prove that. Those are lies. You're a bitter old woman making a scene." "I'm not making a scene, Julian," I said, my voice dropping. "I'm scheduling one. The emergency board meeting is at 10 a.m. in the main conference room. I'm calling for a single vote. Your immediate removal for cause, for gross negligence, and for wire fraud. I have the votes. I have 51%.
Be there or don't. It doesn't matter. You're finished." I hung up. The four of us just stood there, breathing in the quiet. Maria was the first to speak. "My God, Eleanor, we did it." "We haven't done anything yet," I said, grabbing my coat. "We've just scheduled the execution. Now we have to go pull the switch." We drove downtown in 2 cars, Arthur and I in mine, Maria and Thomas following. We didn't talk. We just listened to the hum of the engine. When we pulled up to the Stratton and Cole Tower, the sun was fully up. It glinted off the glass and steel, my glass and steel. We walked into the lobby. The security guard, the one who had looked away when I left with my box, snapped to attention. He saw me, and he saw Arthur, and his face went pale. "Mrs. Reed, Mr. Davies, can I help you?" "We're here for the 10 a.m. board meeting, Frank," I said, not breaking my stride. We didn't need a key card. A moment later, Maria and Thomas joined us, the 4 of us, the relic, the accountant, the secretary, and the archivist. We looked like a focus group for a retirement home. We were the most dangerous people in the building. The elevator ride up was silent. The doors opened onto the 40th floor.
The reception area was in chaos. Julian was there, his face a mottled, angry red. He was pacing. His 3 board members, his finance buddies, were on the giant video screen, looking confused and annoyed. "This is a circus, Julian," one of them was yelling from the screen. "What is this? What is this charter violation?" "It's nothing," Julian roared. "It's a power play by a disgruntled ex-employee." "Then she's right here," I said, walking into the room. The entire office went silent. Everyone stopped typing. Everyone stared. Julian spun around. His eyes were wide, bloodshot. He looked at me, then at Arthur, then at Maria and Thomas. And in that moment, he still didn't get it. He looked at them with pure, unadulterated contempt. "You," he sneered at Thomas. "You're with her. You, the man who files the papers." "I'm the arbiter, Mr. Thorne," Thomas said, his voice shaking but loud. "And I'm here to do my job." "Let's go to the conference room," I said. We walked past him. I took the seat at the head of the table. My seat. Arthur, Maria, and Thomas sat along one side. Julian and his lawyers sat at the other. The video screen flickered with his angry board members. "All right, Eleanor," Julian said, trying to regain his composure, trying to put on his CEO mask. "What is this? A shakedown? What do you want?" "I want to read the minutes," I said. I looked at Arthur. He opened his briefcase. "Let the record show," Arthur began, his voice the dry, steady rasp of a man who has lived his life in ledgers, "that this emergency meeting of the board and shareholders of Stratton and Cole has been called in accordance with Article 5, Section 1 of the firm's charter." "This is absurd," one of the screen lawyers said. "That charter is a 100-year-old ceremonial document." "It's a 100-year-old legal document," I corrected him. "One that Mr. Thorne violated." "Arthur, the evidence." For the next 20 minutes, we didn't accuse, we presented. Arthur didn't just bring allegations, he brought the blueprints. He brought the falsified materials reports. He brought the bank statements from the shell companies. He brought the environmental impact reports Julian paid a third-party firm to bury. He brought the internal emails forwarded by Maria, where Julian explicitly told his team to find the cheapest, fastest way and to worry about the green labels later. With every slide, the color drained from Julian's face. The men on the video screen went from annoyed to confused to silent to absolutely furious. They weren't angry at me anymore. They were angry at Julian. He hadn't just lied to the firm. He had lied to them. He had exposed them. This is all circumstantial, Julian stammered, but his voice was weak. Is it? I said. Then let's look at the shares. Julian, you and your board control 49% of this company. You've always governed by a slim majority. We have 49%, Julian said, his eyes narrowing. You have, what, your 5%? This is a joke. I have my 5%, I said. I also have the 4% proxy from David Hesh, the 3% proxy from Sarah Cole, the 5% proxy from the suburban partners you ignored, the 2% proxy from Thomas Gable, the arbiter, and the 2% proxy from Maria Petroff. That's 21%. Julian was doing the math in his head. He looked confused. 21% plus my... That's not 51%. You don't have it. It's a tie. 49% and 21%. Where's the rest? Ah, I said, the rest. The rest is the 30% held in the Stratton Trust. The 30% that was activated the moment your toxic insulation was nailed to the first Moda condo. The 30% belonging to Clara Stratton. I placed the final document on the table, the notarized, ironclad, permanent proxy agreement giving me full and total voting control over Clara Stratton's 30% share. My 5% plus the 16 from the relics plus Clara's 30. That's 51%, Julian. I looked at him, the man who had told me I was not fresh, the man who had dismissed me, erased me, and stolen my life's work. He was white. He was shaking. He looked small. I call for a vote, I said, my voice echoing in the sudden tomb-like silence of the room. A vote for the immediate removal of Julian Thorne as CEO and as a member of this board for cause, due to gross negligence, financial malfeasance, and willful violation of the company charter. I looked at his board members on the screen. You can vote with him if you like, but the ayes already have 51%. The motion will pass. One by one, the faces on the screen blinked out. They'd already disconnected. They were already calling their own lawyers. They had abandoned him. It was just Julian and his lawyer, who was now quietly packing his briefcase. Julian, I asked, how do you vote? He just stared at me, his mouth opened, but nothing came out.
Let the record show, I said. The ayes have 51%. The motion passes. Julian, you are fired, effective now. I stood up. Arthur, Maria, and Thomas stood with me. Security, I called out to the guards in the hall. They had been listening. Please escort Mr. Thorne from the building. He is to take nothing with him. His access is revoked. Julian was frozen. He was still sitting there, staring at the proxy document. He didn't seem to understand. Get out, Julian, I said, my voice no longer calm. It was cold. He finally looked up at me. His face was a mask of pure, pathetic hatred. You old relic. That's right. And this relic is now your boss. Now get out of my boardroom. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly. He wouldn't look at me. He just let the guards take him by the arms and walk him out. When he was gone, the four of us stood in the silent room.
The adrenaline was fading, and in its place was the terrifying, crushing weight of what we had just done. "My God," Arthur whispered, sinking into a chair. "We own a company that is on fire and sinking. Then we'd better get to work," I said. The next 6 months were the hardest of my life. They weren't a victory lap, they were a war. The cleanup was brutal. Julian hadn't just been cutting corners, he'd been taking out high-interest loans against the firm's assets. We were drowning in debt. My first act as interim CEO was to call a firm-wide meeting. I stood in front of the 200 employees, most of them young, terrified, and convinced they were all being fired. My name is Eleanor Reed. Many of you know me. For those who don't, I've been with this firm for 30 years. Today, we are returning to the principles of our founder. We are not a finance company. We are an architecture firm, and we are going to build things that last. The Moda condo project is terminated effective immediately. All contracts are canceled. We are freezing all non-essential spending. The Dubai office is closed. The executive bonuses are canceled. Arthur Davies is your new CFO. Maria Petrov is your new Chief of Operations. Thomas Gable is our Chief Archivist and head of the New Stratton Legacy Committee. We are not just saving this firm, we are making it worthy of its name again. It will be hard, it will be painful, and many of you will be asked to do more than you've ever done. But if you stay, I promise you, we will build something real.
We lost people. The finance bros Julian had hired left in droves. Good. We rehired the older engineers and designers he had retired. We brought back the people who knew how to build, not just how to optimize. We were sued. The investors Julian had lied to came after us. I met with every single one of them. I didn't make excuses. I opened the real books. "You were lied to," I told them. "So were we. You can sue us, and you'll get pennies on the dollar when we declare bankruptcy. Or you can give me 1 year. Give me 1 year to clean this up. We will sell the toxic land, we will restructure the debt, and we will honor our commitments the right way." Most of them, surprisingly, stayed. They saw in me what they'd never seen in Julian: the truth. Clara Stratton was true to her word. She used her trust fund to give us a low-interest bridge loan, just enough to stop the bleeding. In exchange, I kept my promise. I had the half-built Moda condos dismantled, and I personally oversaw the environmental cleanup of the sites. We turned 2 of them into public parks. And the museum? My museum? I walked into Theo's office on my second day, the 28-year-old Wintertind. He was packing his desk, his face pale. "You're not firing me?" he asked. "No. I'm promoting you," I said. He stared. "I'm promoting you from lead designer to junior apprentice. You're going to work for me. You're going to learn how to draw by hand. You're going to learn about structural integrity and load-bearing and how steel and glass breathe. You're going to put your generative AI toys away for 6 months. And if you're any good, then you can help me design the new facade." He just nodded, his eyes wide with something I hadn't seen in him before: respect. 1 year later, I'm standing on the construction site of the new Chicago Museum of Art. It's a cold morning, and my breath fogs in the air. I'm wearing my hard hat. The structure is rising. The great sweeping bones of steel are reaching for the sky. My design. My legacy. Theo is beside me, holding a set of actual physical blueprints. He's pointing to a joint. "If we move the tension cable here, Eleanor, we can make the glass panel seem to float." I did the math, by hand. I smile. "Show me."
Stratton & Cole is now Stratton, Cole & Reed. It's smaller, it's leaner, but it's profitable, and it's respected. We're winning awards again, this time for sustainability. Arthur is in his element, happily cutting costs and finding efficiencies. Maria is running the firm like a Swiss watch. Thomas has a new state-of-the-art archive, and he's mentoring 3 new apprentices. And Julian? He's facing multiple SEC investigations and a class action lawsuit from the Moda condo homeowners. He's a pariah, a forgotten, fresh idea. I never saw him again. I'm 53 years old. I work 18-hour days. I am tired than I have ever been in my life, and I have never, ever been happier. They told me I was obsolete. They told me I was a relic. They tried to throw me away, but they forgot one simple, crucial thing. They forgot that a relic is just an object, but a foundation, that's what you build an empire on. They tried to bury me, but they didn't realize I was the bedrock. Have you ever been told your time is up? Have you ever been made to feel irrelevant, not fresh, or obsolete? Have you ever been dismissed by people who have a fraction of your experience, a fraction of your wisdom? They're counting on you to be graceful. They're counting on you to go quietly. My question to you is, what foundations have you built that they've forgotten about? What knowledge do you hold that they've dismissed as old? Perhaps it's time to remind them what a legacy truly means.